Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this, the 11th ALPS conference. I'm Peter Ashman. I'm the CEO at BMJ, but also chairman of ALPSP. So, yes, our 11th conference. We're entering our second decade, and we've come back to our roots. I didn't know this, but the very first ALPS conference was held here 11 years ago. So, who was here 11 years for the very first one? Yeah. Few people, excellent. So welcome back. So I want to thank everybody. So I've got some housekeeping notes. Unfortunately, I'll do that first, and then I'm going to hand over to Sarah Faulder from PLS to introduce our keynote speaker. So firstly, thank you to the program committee for putting this program together. It's a range of sessions which we hope will inform and entertain and challenge you, and we've tried to put a program together that covers many of the hot topics in our field at the moment: openness and transparency, data, peer review, e-textbooks, digital humanities, as well as maximising revenues from rights, which is a session sponsored by our platinum sponsor PLS. And, well, as you'll know, on Thursday evening, tomorrow evening, it's a bit of a party time. And so on Friday mornings, it can be a little bit of a lonely place at 9 o'clock. So on Friday morning, we've got two incredible sessions to encourage you to either get to bed early or not go to bed at all, but be back in here for 9 o'clock on Friday morning. Research and Publishing Ethics, and the Me Too era in academic publishing. Both of those promise to be really good sessions as well. So thank you to all of our speakers for giving up your time and for being here. Now, sadly, the ALPSP CEO, Audrey, isn't with us this year. Unfortunately, she's on some extended sick leave, but we do hope that she'll be back with us fairly soon. But I did want to thank Peter Richardson, who manfully stepped in as interim joint CEO over the summer. And he was the former treasurer of ALPS last year. He retired for about 10 minutes, and then we got him back in. But seriously, he's done an incredible job for us over the summer and continues through until the end of October. But also, I'd just like to recognise the ALPS team, who work really hard on behalf of ALPS members. And they've gone through a tough time with Audrey being off over the last few months. So we want to thank and acknowledge them. Very nice, thank you. Very good. Now, a couple of housekeeping notes. Firstly, on the fire drills. There are no planned fire drills. However, anybody who stayed here last night will know that there was a fire drill at 3:15 this morning, and another one at 4:45 this morning. And we can definitely confirm that the fire alarms work very well indeed. Hopefully they won't be tested again. A couple of other things. Sessions will be recorded, as always, so be aware of that. You will be on camera. And so tomorrow night tonight and tomorrow night there are two events for our designated charity, FODAD. So there's a Frisbee event this evening and then a run tomorrow. So if you'd like to be part of those, please see one of the ALPS team. And what other housekeeping notes? Now very important. One of the highlights of the year is the ALPSP AGM. Now, that's tomorrow at 12:20, and that can be a lonely place. So if you'd like to join us at 12:20, sort of come and stretch out in the vast empty spaces that are the AGM, ALPS members are very welcome to come to that and encouraged to do so. I'd like to thank our sponsors, all of our sponsors, but particularly I'd like to thank again our platinum sponsor, PLS. And now we have a welcome reception tonight, sponsored by the Copyright Clearing Centre. The awards tomorrow are sponsored again by MPS, so thank you to them. And the dinner tomorrow is sponsored by Atipon, which will be followed as ever by the world-famous Richard Geddes quiz. So, yeah, exactly. That's 11 years in a row. It's fantastic. So, and also please use the Bizzabo app. Those of you who haven't used it, it's great fun. You can text people and stuff like that. So that's really good. It's got the program on there. And use the hashtag ALPS18 as well, if you could, to spread the message. So those are the housekeeping notes over. We have an amazing keynote speaker, and to introduce him, I'd like to welcome on stage Sarah Faulder, who's the CEO of PLS. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. It's an honour and a privilege for Publishers Licensing Services to be sponsoring the conference this year, once again. I'm delighted to be introducing our keynote speaker. I can't wait to hear what he's got to say, actually. So after completing his PhD in the evolution of rift basins, Chris Jackson had a spell in the Norwegian oil industry before he came over to Imperial College, where he has spent most of his career. And indeed, he became professor of basin analysis in 2015. His work has been widely recognized, both in this country and in the States, through numerous awards that he's collected, including notably from the Geological Societies of both America and London, and also from the American Association of Petroleum Geologists. He's published over 150 papers, and that's really what brings him here today. So alongside his work in geology, he's interested, it would seem, in numerous topics within academic publishing, and particularly Plan S and open access. So I think his address today is rather timely, given the announcements we heard last week around open access. So please welcome Professor Chris Jackson.
Hi, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm incredibly nervous to give a talk to a room full of people who, in contrast to the normal conferences I attend, I normally know about some subtle minutiae of one little thing. And here I'm talking to experts as very much the novice. But I think that's the whole point as to why I'm here, really. Because, my title is deliberately vague because I wanted to kind of cover a range of different things from an academic perspective, which may be useful for publishers and societies, professional and learned societies, to know about, and to give you a little bit of a window into some of the concerns I have from a very personal perspective, but they may be representative of some of my colleagues as well. So to get us started, I better tell you a little bit about who I am. So this is me on the right of that photograph. So I did my BSc in geology at Manchester, PhD there as well, worked in the Norwegian oil industry for a while, then came to Imperial College. So I've been there 14 years, becoming a professor 3 years ago. And I'm going to give you some kind of metrics. Those of you who've met me before know I'm not a big fan of them. But I think it's probably worth me saying a bit about some of my background in terms of my involvement with publishing, but also with professional societies, because one of the things I want to get across in this talk is I care very deeply about professional societies because they've supported me in the past, they support me now, and they support the students I work with. So anything I say here is with an eye on actually informing professional societies in terms of their publishing conduct about some things they might want to be mindful of. So I'm at a big university, so we can lead on things, and we've got a platform we can try and use. I've published over 150 papers, so I've had a lot of peer reviews in that time, and I've done a lot of peer reviewing. I've kind of acted as editor for 3 major journals as well. 2 of those journals have been society-led journals. I've published in books and written book chapters as well, so I've been exposed to that in terms of interactions with publishers. I've also won awards from professional societies again, so I have a very strong emotional connection with professional societies, so a very important role is to represent them when you receive these awards and when you go and give talks associated with, say, lecture tours as well. And I've also served on different committees as well for some large geoscience organisations. So I've sort of seen behind the scenes as well as to some of the conversations that go on in private with publishing committees associated with societies as well. So I've tried to dirty my hands. Now, I'll ask this question, having told you a little bit about me, is how many academics are in the audience, if you'd raise your hands, who would consider themselves full-time academics, let's say? Oh my goodness, 3 out of a lot. Which is part of the problem, okay? The fact of the matter is there's not many academics here, yet a lot of what we're talking about here in the technology, metrics, all the things you all worked so hard to do, there's somebody somewhere producing a bit of research or wanting to draw on some data somewhere, and they're not in this room. There's very few of us here. So there's an issue I'm going to bring up during this talk is about the engagement with the audience and some of the people who are impacted by decisions made by policymakers, and I'm going to talk a bit about Plan S, publishers, and then also funders as well, clearly. So us academics are missing, and why are we missing? We're not lazy, we're not stupid, but we are simply busy. I'm busy with my 3 daughters here on the top left. I'm busy with my wife. I'm busy cycling and doing all the things that I like to do in my spare time. When I go to work, I'm busy doing admin and also on occasion doing research. This is seismic reflection data, which is the data type I work a lot with at work. So we have all these things, these pressures acted upon us as academics, and then at the same time we're trying to hear about Plan S and publishers telling us it's going to cost us £2,000 and we don't know why. And it's actually quite hard to engage even when you want to engage. And if you're somebody like me who's very engaged and passionate about these things, it's still a challenge for me because of all of these things that go on in the backgrounds in our lives. So I think it's worth bearing in mind. This talk comes with a warning. Like I said, it's going to be a bit of a meander through a few different topics as well, because I am no open access, open data publishing expert. I am engaged, I'm interested. I am probably an easier person to convince of some things than some of my colleagues. I want to hear about the things you're going to be talking about here. The fact of the matter is I flew in from Italy last night from filming something for TV, and I've got to go home to pick my kids up from school straight after my talk, okay? So it's hard to find the space to kind of fully engage with these as academics. So I am a novice, but I do want to learn. So to kind of give this talk some structure, I'll start off by telling you a bit about how I became interested. I was 120 papers in, and then I got interested in how the papers got published. It's kind of an odd thing to say, but that's the truth. It all started with ResearchGate. A few boxes you tick as you go through their menus, and I was like, oh, what does this copyright thing mean? And then I thought, oh, it's a bit odd that you can't share your own paper. And honestly, it was pretty much about 3 years ago, really, where I thought, oh, what's copyright and CC BY and, okay, gold, and it was all around the time of, in the UK, the ref deposition within 3 months of acceptance of publishing of the papers. There was a lot of chop in the water that people like me who were just busy cranking the handle on our research and working really hard, the paper being published was the last thing we cared about at that point, really. I heard about things about open access, about Sci-Hub as well, and also things like impact factor, because the more early career researchers I spoke to, because at that time when I was being made a professor, I was talking a lot still to early career researchers who were obviously and understandably very concerned about things like impact factors, which is not the focus of the talk today, although I will touch upon it at various points. The Geological Society of London on the lower right there, impact factors feature very prominently on lots of web pages. Quoted to 3 decimal places, mean on a skewed distribution. I remember something in maths at school telling me not to do that, but everybody still seems to do it. So there was this collection of things in here which really fired my interest, partly in the mechanics and the numbers, but also because I started to get very fearful of how some of these things were impacting more junior researchers. And I felt, as I was becoming more senior at that point, I had a role to play in educating myself so I could appropriately educate them and try and assist. So let's think a bit about professional associations, professional societies. So some of you are in the room here, and then some of the publishers who support the activities of those professional associations are also here. So, it seeks to further a particular profession, the interests of individuals engaged in that, and the public interest. So that's a kind of massage Wikipedia definition. So what does that actually mean? It can mean training courses. So the professional society provides training courses. Some of that might lead to things like chartership, so actually a professional qualification which is a big deal in engineering or in earth sciences. If you want to be a professional witness, you'd need to have an accreditation. There's also things like conferences. They support conferences in terms of physical space, but also general conference services. General networking as well, again, providing that physical space, but also virtual spaces, shall we say, for people with a shared interest to interact. They give out money as well, so they support activities of their members. So student grants are a really key thing for many of the professional societies I've worked with. Sometimes lobbying as well, so a voice up to government and policymakers to try and influence the decisions in their favour towards their members. And, and there's, the question is there anything else? Now, what I haven't mentioned on there, obviously, is publishing, right? So one of the really important roles now for professional societies is actually helping communicate the science. So actually giving their members, or not even their members, but just acting as a forum for the discipline they represent to actually to have their science get out there. Now, the concern around that is that a lot of those professional societies, a large amount of their revenue actually now comes from their publishing activities, which is great in a way that they now have maybe a more secure revenue stream, and quite a large one that then allows them to underpin a lot of the activities I've referred to on the previous slide. But in many ways, they're tied to that and could, in fact, be hamstrung by that. So then they're at the will of oscillations in revenue associated. So then it becomes a very competitive market. And so the societies now find themselves in a competitive market with professional publishers. And some of those societies have actually opted to get those professional publishers to actually handle their publishing matters. So there's, in my science domain, there's still a blend of those two things. Some societies still have their own presses, effectively, and some have passed it over to other funders. So there is that pressure there, and that pressure is going to keep being applied. And that's what I'm going to talk about now is something like Plan S, where even before this was announced, in some of my discussions with professional societies, there was a concern about how they were going to compete on things as simple as time to assigning of DOI, things as simple as online early. There was concerns about how they could compete, not having the resources, and they felt they were losing authors because they couldn't go toe to toe with the publishers. Something like Plan S brings it even more into focus for professional societies, because many of them are still running with hybrids, or some of them are running with combinations. Some are trying to flip. JOSOC America have flipped some of theirs, and that's come with a whole bunch of other problems. But they've got to be mindful of this. And now, Plan S, cue chaos and confusion, right? I mean, you go onto any social media, you bump into somebody in the toilet or in the lift, an academic, and they go, I heard about somebody from the European Union, I thought Brexit had happened. And you go, no, you can go to all of these things like from Martin Eve and Ashley Folio. I follow on Twitter and I read a lot of their blog posts, and they're very informed, and these people are even way more engaged than me, so I'm sort of chasing on their coattails a little bit. But it is just changing daily, the view about what it is. It is just a plan. There's lots of details to be worked out, but it's caused a lot of concern, and I feel that if an academic feels that concern, I can only imagine if you're at some 200-year-old professional society in the centre of London, you're probably not reading Twitter that much, and you're waiting for something concrete to come to you as a society to then decide how you're going to move forward with your publishing matters. I went about on Twitter and asked what I thought was a simple question. I'll ask the question, should publicly funded research be freely available to access, read by the public? It was a very poorly worded question because some people went off on open data, so there were some very rich streams about, no, I don't want to give my data to anybody, no matter who paid for it. But a lot of people there just said yes straight away. Yes, big fat yes, should that even be a question? Clearly some people were more circumspect. Richard Butler at Birmingham, who I interact with quite a bit on Twitter, because I really like some of his views, often quite skeptical but very informative. He says, this is going to rule us out of publishing in Nature and Science, which aren't society journals, let's say, but if your bread and butter is publishing in those types of journals and prestige matters to you, this will come as a bit of a hammer blow in terms of your professional career. And then there's other journals under there as well, which are running with hybrid, which he wouldn't be able to publish in, or his discipline of paleontology probably wouldn't be able to publish in. As well, there's follow-up comments, and this is just one I've picked from hundreds and hundreds. This is the sad reality of APCs. Even students at Oxford don't have money to pay for them. So this is a student here who's saying that he submitted a very long paper. There was per-page charges. There was colour figure charges. The uni's pot is empty. I have no other funds, and I'm at $, Oxford. Solution, break up the paper into two and hide lots of data in supplements. So there's a material impact there of what a society-led journal might look like in the future as to how researchers are going to frame their science. Okay, so for me, one of the journals I really like is from the European Geosciences Union, but they charge per page, so we're already writing shorter papers so we can afford to publish there, which is a kind of odd situation to be in when you have finished the research, to actually be thinking, I can only afford 5 pages. Because, and even then it's cheaper than going to some like glossy magazine sort of thing. So we have those challenges. There's lots of interesting discussions about the route via which Plan S maybe come to bear. People saying, preprints, repositories, green and diamond OA, nobody's forcing people into high APC journals. I said, we're not sure what's permissible at this point. People are saying there's diamond journals here. Rebecca Williams, I said yet, because one thing that's coming now in earth sciences, at least, and I see it in some other disciplines, are more diamond open access journals. And there was some interesting Twitter traffic this morning about people saying that libraries should start investing in diamond open access journals for society. So trying to flip society journals to diamond by direct investment from libraries and information services at institutions. Because then you kind of keep that money in the society pot and away from the private publishers, and then all those membership activities can be underpinned. But then the understandable criticism coming back from major publishers would be publishing is just one part of what they do. Right? They do lots of other great things around data creation and technology development. So you can see how all of these things may pressure a society-led journal. And I quite like this cartoon here. It says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. I quite like it. But I think in the case of professional learner societies, like many of you have connections with here, I think it's wrong, right? Because I think, because of what I said earlier on, the motivation for revenue for those societies is because they are charities oftentimes, and they want to reinvest in key member activities more directly. So I've worked with a number of professional societies, different sizes, and we are running very close to whatever allows us to maintain our charitable status, and we really desperately in our heart and souls want to underpin member activities. So we give out a lot of money and we support a lot of endeavours, because that's our only concern, is supporting the people down the road and next door to us. That's what we believe our core business is. So, you've got to balance the business needs of the publishers. If you're a society who does have a major publisher running your journals, I'm interested to see what happens in that case. I'm interested to see what happens for societies of various sizes who currently run their own presses as well. I think there's going to be some interesting decisions to be made by publications committees for those societies. To move on to some of the engagement I've had with societies then around this. So, we've talked a bit about the pressures that and the concerns people have. It would be fair to say some people I've spoken to think of societies being like sacred cows. They cannot be, they stand for the noble good, and we need to kind of protect them at all costs, and I believe in that. Some of the exchanges I've had, though, is that, this exchange with Susan Hoff here, who works for the Seismological Society of America, the problem is that scientific societies and their publications have to have a viable business model. For example, this society runs on a shoestring. Without memberships and subscriptions, they would not survive. And my response is this, lots of societies never set themselves up to be major publishers, but now find themselves dependent on that revenue. And in any case, my argument has been, and I'll talk about this in the next couple of slides, is transparency of costs incurred to produce a paper is key, yet do any of those society journals disclose that? I know the Royal Society, from speaking to some people from there, that they have quite a clear way of laying out how much it costs them. So you as an author, or you as a member of that society, you can at least see what you're getting and feel that there's a reasonable transaction occurring when you submit your paper and then pay the APC. Because let's not forget, us as members of those societies, we care deeply for those societies and we do want them to maintain. I'll talk about my personal views on the last slide, but I want to support society-led journals. It's kind of hard, though, sometimes when you try and talk to societies. I send an email at some point. I'd like to discuss with you some issues related to journal impact factors. This was after the big our impact factor went up 0.121 announcements that come out. I think it's at the beginning of summer they always come out. It drives me mad. And I say, I'd like to discuss this. And then 2 months later, I just remember that I didn't hear back from you regarding your usage of impact factors. If you have some time, I'd like to get your thoughts on this. And then there's absolutely no response at all. I've never got a response to that email. So I just think locking it down from a society point of view and not engaging with the discussion when somebody comes to you with that concern about APCs or impact factors, or just trying to talk about some of the things which we're talking about in the corridors of our institutions, I don't think that's particularly progressive. I think there needs to be more discussion. I was talking to Alison earlier on from PLOS as well about this other exchange I had where, knowing I was interested in open access, a friend of mine who was an editor-in-chief at a journal for a society came and said, we voted to introduce a small APC, $60, with the aim to convert authors into members by waiving the APC. So they had this idea that they would charge people $60, and then they'd say, if you become a member for $100 instead, we'll waive the APC. And I thought it was like the maddest plan I'd ever heard in my entire life. So I said, I think you should push the APC to a much bigger number, make colour figures free, make the whole journal OA. The proposed APC is too little and cannot materially offset your costs. It'll only piss off authors. Right? Because the day before you didn't pay anything, then suddenly somebody says, I want $60, and you're like, well, this is my professional society that I'm paying $100 to a year anyway. Oh, but then you're going to give me that for free. And then he said, I like the OA idea, but I have no idea what the real cost of this would be. I'm like, these are the people with their hands on the tillers. So I said, I've heard between $200 and $3,000, so an order of magnitude cost to produce a paper. And I've heard numbers bigger than that, to be fair. The days of societies using publications as a revenue stream might be numbered. They'll need to find other ways of making money, or more precisely, and this is something I want to stress, enough money to do what the members want them to do. So having enough money to pay out on those grants and support a rich suite of activities of your members is what we want to do. It's not just to kind of have lots of money sloshing around, because the books of most of these societies are publicly viewable. So the members will want to know what's going on. I believe that transparency is really critical. Some other kind of exchanges, with other researchers, this was from last year, the amount we pay for the paper is just subsidizing the paper press of the journal, which society members demand. So some people still believe that, the physical printed versions are what are keeping the costs high for societies. So things where you can get print and digital. I can tell you I think for the Geological Society of London, where I've done some work, the uptake on print, as I understand it, is under 10% now. So most of it's digital delivery of material, but they still retain some of that print. A lot of the other societies I've worked with now have scrapped their online only already. So there's been a slow move, I'd say, over the last 5 years towards online only. APCs haven't declined and nothing's changed in terms of cost, but they have gone online only. In the same email exchange, this was added, the society will drive us to lose any nostalgia if they don't evolve. Worryingly for them, the latest generation don't give a shit about the past. So they're probably coming through with less money in a more competitive environment, and they have been society members because their supervisors told them to be so, and it costs £10 rather than £500. But if they don't see things coming back, they probably won't be too happy. And this was on the back of them paying $7,500 for an APC. So they were pretty upset about this because they had colour, they had pages, and they paid for gold. They paid for gold OA and they didn't get figures or colours included. It's horrible. But some societies, having said that, to return to the Geological Society, they've been, I think very grown up in their handling of things like impact factors. And I've had some discussions around transparency on APCs as well. They're signatories to DORA. It's kind of hidden somewhere on their webpage about it. They tell you a bit about how journal impact factors are calculated. But I do like that the professional societies are being very transparent about those things, as well as regular kind of professional publishers as well. I think to me, it shows a kind of maturity about how to handle the numbers, because what I always hear is, yeah, but you academics really care about impact factors. That's why we publish them to 3 decimal places. I'm still not that convinced by that, and I'll say a bit more about that towards the end. AGU as well, they have a very rich suite, the American Geophysical Union. It's one of the largest science societies in the world. I think it's the largest. They have this very rich suite of information about the journal, but also about the peer review. But then they also publish commentaries by their own publishing managers and different editors about how to handle impact factors. So for me, I like that, and it's something I would encourage professional societies to do, is to kind of talk more about it, and I think it will inform us and educate people a lot better. Having said all that, there's still concerns about impact factors. This was, again, another exchange I had. I've kind of modified it and I've kind of anonymized it because I don't want to drop anybody in it. But, impact factors decreased for 2 journals. We will analyze the data behind these changes and revisit the journal development plans. And I think this was for a decrease of about 0.123 or something. It was a very tiny decrease in the impact factor. And I just said, can you give us the citation distributions for the last couple of years? Can you tell me if there were any papers that were anomalously cited a lot? That drove, and it actually turns out when I looked at the numbers, it looked like there was a paper 2 years ago that had dropped off that had been highly cited because it was an invited review paper. So in terms of revisiting the journal development plans, as a society, I'm not quite sure what you would do about that, but I do think it's important for the societies to be aware of where those bumps in those numbers are coming from and what they might mean, and also whether it actually changes the author's perception of the journal. When you ask about journals allowing pre-printing as well, when you're trying to engage in those sorts of discussions, people say, oh, no, they don't. I'm asking the question here on that last comment is there any financial modelling done by the professional society? So rather than just saying, in this case, preprints are going to be damaging to our business model, has anybody looked at it to see how it might benefit a society? And in this case, it was about the Seismological Society of America again. But then you get, comments back, none of the decisions are made lightly, and I'm saying, no, I'm not saying they're taken lightly, but, could preprinting in this case allow journals, society-led journals, to grow? Not threaten their business models. Could you get better copy? Could you get better papers because you allow preprinting? Might you, engage and ignite the early career researchers who are preprinting, actually build some sort of journal loyalty? Because they're like, oh, but this is the journal that allows preprinting, and it's a good journal. Let's go there. And you could actually use it as a hook rather than seeing it as an outright threat. Because when I had some discussions with people about preprinting, one of the comments I had back was, isn't that when people just publish their papers on their own before they give it to you and you then can't sell it? And so there's a bit of a misunderstanding about what that is. Not in this room, but there is in some other rooms. Again, another comment here, the long-term viability of our professional society, which do so much to advance the cause of risk mitigation, can't be taken for granted. And I'm not taking anything for granted, but my question about transparency of cost still stands. And I'm supportive of society activities, But even if it damages my society financially, I still would like them to be transparent and open with me. I don't want them to keep secrets from me about how much it costs. And I don't know what you, again, this is maybe something to discuss afterwards, but that's what I feel like, is I am very passionate about professional societies, but I don't want them to take the mick out of me. I don't want them to just keep secrets from me in any particular way. So like I say, it's all about transparency, because societies pride themselves on many of the things on this slide, about truth, accuracy, openness, honesty in terms of the peer review and the science they publish. But I also want to see transparency around things like APCs, but also about what their view is on metrics as well. I'd also like to see transparency around how things like journal impact factors are treated and viewed. The reason I say this is because in some instances I've seen in my role as an editor, editors-in-chief saying to me, we need to invite some famous people to write a couple of papers to boost our impact factor for the next 2 years. So we need to get somebody with some old ideas to write an old paper, and then it will get cited 200 times. So that skewed citation distribution, that little spike we need at the end to drag, get away from the median and back to the mean, because the mean looks better than the median. And I've argued with people in rooms about that, and I find it particularly distasteful that when academics who are often in those editorial positions suddenly become so driven in their decisions about the impact factor that they will then start to make calls like that we need to sort of start priming the impact factor to get more things. And I just think, can we think of other novel ways of actually making sure the papers are better? Like pre-printing, for example, or peer review courses led by the journals and things like that. Just to train my sights on GIF for 1 second, I honestly think even if GIF sort of disappeared overnight, and this came up at an Altmetrics forum I was at maybe a couple of months ago, I honestly think if impact factors disappear overnight, if they were like banned, I don't think anything would happen. Because I honestly think academics are hardwired to know which are the best journals to publish in. So I was actually just saying this, we were just chatting about this just before I came on stage. I've seen it in my field where, there's 2 journals, one had the impact factor, one had one here, and people would always submit here. Then this one dropped and this one went up, and people still submitted to this one, even though the impact factor was, this one was 1.5 and this one was 3.5. Why? Because the better papers are in the 1.5. So journal impact factors are used in a very quantitative sense when academics sometimes want it, but then they're just ignored when they know and feel where the best papers are. So some of the discussions around DORA, which I've been involved in at Imperial College, and things that are captured in aspects of the Leiden Manifesto as well, I'm not that convinced that journal impact factors are the kind of the be-all and end-all. I honestly think academics would probably truck on doing the same thing if they even... What I'm more interested in is what happens to new journals. When new journals start, what happens to them as they're trying to build their impact factor, and then how academics view that as they're building. Yesterday it wasn't very good because it was below 2, and now it's good because it's 2.2. I'm very interested if anybody has any thoughts on that. One thing, again, I've kind of touched on preprints a couple of times, and it's something I just wanted to talk about as I move towards the end of my talk, is I was involved in setting up Earth Archive, so kind of with Earth Science Information Partners, Centre for Open Science, using their Open Science Framework preprints infrastructure. So I felt it was one of the things I could do, having had this slow drag and burn through education around publishing, that it was something I could do that was a positive step towards trying to make people more community-minded and produce better papers that would go to journals. And I just felt it was a way of actually learning a bit more about how publishing workflow works and how publishers view us as academics. We've had some issues with publishers with this, which I'll touch on. Earth Archive's not the only game in town. AGU, big geoscience organisation, big Earth and Planetary Science organisation, they started up ESOAR as well, right around the same time. So Earth Archive is almost a year old. I think we were born on the day of the Force 11 meeting in Berlin last year. Was the first day, or it was the day before we first started accepting submissions. But, there's another one out there. So it's building in the earth science domain. I know things like bioRxiv, SocArchive, Archive, of course. There's other communities that have embraced that more readily, and I'm interested to think about what society's views are going to be. Society's views are going to be about preprints in the future as they grow. I don't need to say anything about really what preprints are to this audience. Just to say, there's also now these geography specific, so IndArchive, there's Africa Archive, there's more geographically focused preprint servers. I personally am not sure how I feel about that yet. So I can't, be interested to see what happens and whether geography should define spaces for researchers to interact in. Something about that makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable, but, we are where we are. We'll see what happens. And what's nice about this is, this infrastructure that's being put in place by these different preprint servers is being underpinned by things like hypothesis and by pre-review as well. So preprint's not just as a way of making the science better, but also as a tool to actually train early career researchers and train ourselves at every stage in our careers to review papers better. I also like the idea of being community-minded, community-spirited. And actually, rather than seeing scientific publishing as a kind of cutthroat business, why not, when we're all in there together, kind of try and push us all on and try and all find out the right answers and do things in a more collaborative sense. And I feel like preprints and this kind of stuff underneath in here, which is just two examples, are a good step in that direction. Preprints are growing in terms of their support from funders, support from universities. These are just very few of the many on here, but universities on the right, funders on the left in here. So preprints in support of grant applications are a really powerful thing. Again, I guess most people in the room would understand why that would be. Preprints are growing, not only just preprints in general on the left here, but also Open Science Framework hosted preprints on the right, and they're up to April of this year. So a big growth in there, preprints and postprints and mixtures and increases in download rates as well. So kind of having this discussion with societies in these publication committees, I think they need to see graphs like this perhaps, maybe to know that there's a market out there, there is a growing passion for this as a integral part of the scholarly communication is to preprint before journal submission or coeval with journal submission. And again, I don't want to sound negative at all. I actually just think it's quite exciting. I think as a society, and whether you're working with, because some of the societies, if their papers, their journals are being run by publishers, they're probably already exposed to preprints already. Swarth Archive looks very nice as well. I'll talk a bit about the numbers in a moment, but it's not been plain sailing, because one of the things we had to do when we set it up was then go around educating our peers in the earth sciences, but also societies, earth science societies, as to preprints as well. So we ended up with these kind of slightly odd emails where I emailed the APG. This is the world's largest professional petroleum geoscience organization. It's got 30,000 members. They have this giant journal called The Bulletin. And I just emailed saying, your position on preprints is unclear, and the Sherpa Romeo entry explicitly states that preprints aren't allowed. So they hadn't gone in to update their record in Sherpa Romeo, yet a lot of people were using Sherpa Romeo for all its gremlins to decide whether they could preprint and to educate themselves. And I got an answer within 10 minutes saying, oh yeah, of course we do. And thank you, we've submitted a correction to Sherpa Romeo. So some of those societies are very, very dynamic, and they are very engaged, and they'd heard of it, and they changed straight away, because the follow-up conversations to this was what could they do to then talk to some of the young people, they call it, which is the worst term, but that's another talk for another day. The young people of APG, which is a little group, how can we engage with them? So I'm talking to them about that, and that's kind of exciting. It's not always so easy. An exchange with another professional society, again in the earth sciences, saying, we took an informal vote on preprint servers. The result was that the group decided to stay silent on the matter. This is the best bit. So while there is no prohibition, there is no formal endorsement. Unbelievably, it gets worse. And so I was like screaming and shouting and running around and like emailing everyone in the archive going, oh my God, these people. The group would rather give editors the flexibility to make independent decisions within a broad framework, which meant that a number of people got their papers rejected from one of the journals run by this society because they pre-printed, and other people, including myself, we had 3 papers published last year. And this was one of the most prestigious journals in our area. If research is going to be rejected, or papers are going to be rejected based on the whim of an individual editor because a society has not made an all-encompassing decision about what their collective view is, I think that's a huge problem. And I pushed super hard on this, and I have got nowhere. It's kind of the conversation sort of ended. So we are where we are at the moment with this, but I'm going to go back next month and, politely try and say, I think we need some more clarity as a community as to what your position is, because this is too uncertain. And for early career researchers to enter that shark pool, can you imagine? It's all right for me to kind of scream and shout and do things like this, but they just won't submit there, or if they're preprint friendly, they'll go elsewhere with their papers. But despite all that turbulence, Earth Archive's growing kind of nicely. This is a graph going back to, I think it's back to April time. We're on about 430 contributions, might be slightly more on there now. So we're on for probably over 500 or so in the end of the first year. And it's growing quite well, you can see the early adopters here, and then we've had a fairly steady rate. So the steady rate is encouraging in that it's steady and it's not plateauing or people are actually taking material off, which they can't do that easily. But it's interesting, and I'd like to kind of talk to, society-led journals, because I think there's a role there for some of their editors to be actively looking on preprint servers for copy, and I know that happens already, and I know there's overlay journals, but from an earth science point of view, this is not common. We think in a geological timescale often, the people I work with. But we know that this is already happening, that people are going on and looking at these sorts of material, and I'd like to try and encourage that for some of the societies I work with as well. So just to finish on the last few slides, I was talking earlier on about what are the challenges of talking about open science and open access with early career researchers, and trying to make them feel comfortable that it's not going to jeopardize their careers, and what are the numbers around that and what are you doing about it? So these are data from a Nature article, Nature Index comment piece, bit of research a couple of years ago, where clearly a lot of researchers under the age of 35, felt that, open access publishing is very important to fairly important. So that's, for me, looking at this positively from a society point of view, that's encouraging that there's a market of people out there who want to publish open access. Will you publish in an open access journal? Again, a strong yes. No, but I plan to in the future, so that gets me to 72%. So again, more than 2/3 of people are positive towards doing it. The way it was written in the article was kind of odd, because it kind of said, well, young researchers want to do it, but they're not. I thought that was an unfair sub-headline to the article. But so I think these are relatively positive numbers looking forward. They had least experience with open access publishing, of course they do, because they've often published less, and their PIs are the ones dictating often the venue choice. But there's an interesting quote in here. It's clear that institutions need to do a better job to equip academics with knowledge regarding innovations in publishing, including on open access as well. And I think that's why me coming to things like this and that messaging that comes out from the publishers and the policymakers and the societies is really important, so people use those words all the time. Closer to home, we're trying to embed that into our Imperial College kind of our general approach to how we do research assessment, so in terms of responsible metrics use. Also, just in terms of general education, so my research group I work with, the Basin's research group, we have a code of conduct which is freely available online. It talks about general things about professional and personal conduct and mental health. We talk about a lot of things, but we also have a section in there on outputs and open science. So we give this to the students on the first day of their PhD. So straight away in there, we start introducing them to things like open access, preprint server, publicly available via Green OA, trying to teach people about what those terms mean, and also things like DORA as well, and other kind of statements. So you can see, I think that at the like local level, at the institution level, but also at the research group level, we have a role to play. There's an addendum to this in that we've had lots of discussions in our research group about society-led journals, and a lot of the students now are keener to support those than they are journals that are published by major publishers. A lot of students they feel that they can see that clarity of the transaction. You know, they publish here, the journal then sells, you know, the society then sells the journal, they get the money, and then some of that money comes back to a meeting or a student grant they get. They feel it's a bit more clear that way. What was interesting, you know, from the point of a leadership point of view is the interview yesterday with not Peter Campbell, but Philip Campbell. There was a typo on the Twitter thread, if you saw it, with Stephen Curry, who I work closely with at Imperial. And he made this comment here: I have no confidence that the older generation will solve this problem. Change must come from the new generation of researchers. I like the idea of that, but I don't think it's correct, because I think there's a power imbalance there, and to ask early career researchers to jeopardize their careers potentially with no help from people who are in more senior positions is just unfair. I understand the sentiment, and perhaps you know it would be stated in a slightly more subtle way, face to face. So I think some of the early career researchers have to engage in the conversation and become educated, but also some of the more senior people have to show the way and engage more directly in places like this. So we have this, you know, we regarding education, we have this Mapping the Future of Research Assessment Imperial, which is next week, I think it is, that me and Stephen Curry are organising. If you want to come along, there's still tickets. They'll be streamed online on YouTube as well, but we're going to be talking about Imperial College's signing of DORA. Lizzie Gadd will be there talking about Loughborough's sort of involvement, talking about, there'll be a session or a discussion around society journals as well. So please consider coming along. So just to conclude, you know, what can you do, the people in the audience here? And somebody asked me this at the Altmetrics thing a few weeks ago, so I kind of thought a bit about it, and I was thinking, well, what could publishers do? I'm not one of the hardcore open access advocates, or whatever they want to call themselves, who is like everything should be free and you people are all terrible. And that, because I think a lot of the issues actually lie with the academics. You know, like, you know, kind of prestige, addiction, just poor conduct in general. There are issues with how we're doing things. So I'm a bit more kind of self-reflective in that way. But, you know, and I do try and think about what could you do. Just stop offering print would be good, would be one thing I'd say. But I'd like to see, you know, more transparency around price setting as well. That would be kind of interesting to know a little bit more about how much things cost. And the reason I say that is because I think a lot of academics think it's free. I submit for free. My paper's published for free. I click on a link for an Elsevier journal. I get the PDF for free. No money is seen by most of the academics. Therefore, most academics, I go in my corridor and speak to people, they say it's all free. And it's clearly not. You know, the library are paying a huge amount in subscriptions, and they don't see it. Honestly, you'd be, I'd say amazed, you'd just be disappointed if you knew that. Like people, if you don't see the money coming out of your pocket, somebody comes to your door and knocks and says, can I have £2,000 for this APC? Which means that you can't go to this conference next year. People just don't see that. So I think the transparency would be useful in that respect, so people know it costs money to put servers and people and copy edit and do all that stuff. And I think for professional publishers, you know, I'd admit, you know, I'm critical of you sometimes, but I know it costs money. I'd like to see strongly reduced APCs to early career researchers. I think it's an opportunity to build brand loyalty, especially for societies as well, because I think you've already got the hearts and minds from early career researchers who are warm towards those societies. So I think one way of engaging them early in their careers when they start publishing might be to actually discount APCs if you are running with a full OA model, a gold OA model. Even if you're not, it still might be a way of getting them to just engage in the transaction and actually think a little bit more about it. I think that would be a good way of attracting and retaining authors, which is the other thing. Free colour figures and low per page charges. Lots of people do that. I'm still amazed by the amount of journals, especially society journals, who still charge a lot of money for colour figures and a lot for anything over 5 pages long or 6 pages long. That's problematic. I'd like to see some transparency around that, or just learn a bit more. And also, it would be nice to be transparent about your view on metrics, like I showed the examples earlier on, for journals to actually start saying, you know, and societies to say, this is what we think about it in principle and also in practice. So all those horrible things that come out. Is anybody from Frontiers here? It always makes me giggle, the ones from Frontiers that come out with all the very colourful things, and there's like lots of numbers and things flashing on animated GIFs. It always makes me giggle. But like, I just like to see a bit more subtlety around the handling of that, because I'm not sure it actually works really, because I think most academics still know how those numbers are generated. So thank you for your time and for sticking with me through that meander through my adventures in publishing, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
Hi, I'm Ian Russell from the Society for Endocrinology. Great talk. Thanks for kicking off the conference. That was excellent. Just picking up on impact factors, though, one of the things that those of us that spent time in publishing kind of cling to is that, you know, academics are really driving that impact factor thing because, you know, they need it on their CVs, publication in high impact journals. It helps to get them tenure, et cetera, et cetera. So it was slightly surprising for me to hear your views on journal impact factors. So could you say something about that? And I agree with you entirely that the power is in the hand of the academic with this, but or is it? Because funders, you know, pay so much attention to that, and I know there are efforts to move the research assessment exercise away from impact factors, but that never really seems to happen.
Yeah. So just a couple of things to pick on there. So my department is Earth Science and Engineering, so there's a lot of engineers there who do kind of petroleum engineering and environmental engineering. And I'm a scientist, but with some petroleum focus. So impact factors are always like the band of impact factors that I aim for. I'm not Nature, Science, Cell, things like that. My target, you know, the kind of journal impact factors I range between is like 1.5 and 3. Okay, so very, very narrow band and not much variability in there. And some of my colleagues, it's less than 1.5 actually, and some are less than 1. So they've never been, when I became a professor, they were never a big part of my portfolio. So we had a broader set of things we've been assessed on. Quality is measured by impact factor, maybe one of them, quantity as well, research income, teaching quality, all of those things. So it's as much to do with valuing those other things as it is actively working to dismantle the impact factor. That's what I was trying to say. I think a lot of the power is in our hands. So it's about making sure we more broadly and fairly value all the things that allow people to do great science and publish in journal X, Y, or Z. I think we need to recognize all of those things. In terms of the ref, I mean, well, it depends how HEFCE, UKRI feel the panels that they convene are really handling the impact factors in the assessment. I mean, we can only, as academics, we can only go on what we're told, and they're signatories to DORA, and you know, you talk to the individuals, and they say we don't use impact factors, or we tell them not to use impact. I mean, the metric TIDE from 2014 wasn't that convincing that impact factors actually correlated that strongly with final ref score. There was some field dependency there. So get that message out. Actually, I mean, I made this point to my head of department. I think it's professionally remiss of us to actually go around telling people to only aim for impact factor, like high impact factor journals, if actually in the last ref that wasn't the thing which gained you as a department an overall high score. What seemed to matter is a variety of outputs in different locations, spending time on the impact case studies, and then things like around the other things we need to value. So as an academic, I can only go off what I'm being told is being done in the ref. I mean, I think we talked about this at the HEFKE Responsible Metrics Forum in, was it March or April? And I'm still kind of amazed that the panel are asked to read so many papers. I can sort of see why they can't get through them. But nobody's given me a really good answer to that. I've never had a really strong answer to that yet from anybody yet. Like, why, if you give people, like, whatever it is, 30 minutes to read a paper, no wonder they go on Google Scholar, maybe. I don't know. I find it hugely hard to engage in it in Ref at all, I'll be honest. Because I just can't believe having my paper go through 6 reviewers to get into a journal with an impact factor of 2.5, then it gets spun out to another panel member for Ref, and they read it and give me a 2 or a 3. I mean, what does that say about me as a researcher? I'm not sure.
Hi, Pippa Smart from the ALPS Journal Learned Publishing. Many thanks for a great talk, some really good perspectives. I'd like to ask you a question about the preprints, because I completely understand a desire to put your stuff up in public view as quickly as possible. But with the annotation tools that are available now, what is it that journals are adding that makes you bother with journals if you can do preprints?
Well, I mean, we're new to it in Earth Scientists. I don't really have an answer to that because I've not seen enough of the impact of the annotation tools on Earth Archive in this particular example. Yeah, who knows, in the fullness of time, overlay journals may become a much bigger issue in Earth Sciences, and then, yes, the journals may come under pressure because of that. I want to make it very clear, that's not why we started Earth Archive. We've been accused, like, by the critics. They're like, oh, you want to kill journals. You don't value peer review, Chris. You think it's a blog post, really. Why don't people just keep... Like, that's not why. The real reason we started it was because we thought it was a way of actually augmenting the peer review process by actually having more eyes on the paper ahead of submission or during submission. We felt it was a good way of training people by allowing them, and with Hypothesis now plugged into Earth Archive, it makes that much more streamlined. It's a good way of building bridges. There's some fantastic opportunities that have arisen for stories we're hearing from people who put their preprints up and they end up with a collaborative project, or they get invited to go and give a talk. There's lots of other things. And even if Earth Archive dies next year, I feel from the 2 years of experience I've had with it, I'd have felt I've learned a lot about, I still think there's been some very positive things to come out of it. So going back to your question, I'm not sure what's going to happen. I can't see it happening. I just think journals are going to be around for a long time. And that's fine, isn't it? I mean, like I say, I'm not, like, my intention's not to kill them. It's just to make them better. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Karen Hawkins from IEEE. We are a technical membership association in the electrical engineering space. I want to thank you for such a reasonable discussion on this topic. I particularly like that you touched on some of the unintended consequences. What I'd like to ask is a lot of the discussion around open access, particularly in the mass media, has focused on big commercial publishers making unacceptable profits on the back of researchers. And that's put a lot of rancor into the discussion. And it's become difficult for societies that are doing a lot of the types of things that you highlighted here to surface some of the issues about sustainability, or again, unintended consequences. Yeah. Balancing paper volume with paper quality. So I'm interested in your thoughts about how we could facilitate more of the thoughtful discussions and how we can surface some
Kill Twitter would probably help.
Yeah.
Like, if you could just pull the plug out, that would probably fix a lot of the problems, to be absolutely honest with you. I mean, you're completely correct. There's some people who've made it their life goal who, weirdly enough, they're not that academic, right? Or they were academics. And now there's another new space, which is around open access advocacy. And it's those loud voices which drown out maybe some of the more reasonable ones. And that makes it difficult for you, like in the ways you've just said as a society, but it makes it really difficult for people like me who want to not be seen as selling out, but want to try and maybe find a slightly more middle ground between the people who do want to make a pot of cash and people who believe, they should be able to publish for free everywhere. I honestly don't know what you do about it. I mean, those people have, and it comes down to maybe my second or third slide, it's the people who have more time on their hands. Like a lot of the people who are doing that are sort of not doing it professionally, although they almost are, right? They are reading a lot, they're communicating a lot, they're shouting a lot about these things. And the rest of us are all like cycling or going for runs or taking our kids to school, right? And we don't have time to do that. So I'm not sure we'll ever be able to take over the mass media side of things. Because even if something's published as an invited piece in Times Higher, like Nature Comments or something, there can be something written by those people in a bit more of a reasonable way, but still, like I personally think the language is inappropriate a lot of the times. I think it's just inflammatory. You probably know some of the names I'm thinking about in my head right now, but I just don't think it's particularly positive for what I would really like to get, and I think the majority of academics would like to get, I don't think is going to be achieved by talking to people in that way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi. I'm Tony O'Rourke from the Charlesworth Group. We're a publishing services company. I just wanted to pick up on the comment you made earlier on about this kind of lack of appreciation of the costs in publishing from your colleagues. And I mean, I've heard this for years and years and years. I'm old. And I've heard this, for the last 20 years. It's a free lunch. We're getting free access. Whose responsibility is it to train the researchers, to train the research community, the academics, in terms of what publishing is actually about? Is it us? Is it the publishing community? Is it you, the universities? Is it the funding agencies? Where does that responsibility lie, and what can we do to help improve that level of education?
I don't think it lies with you, the publishers. I think it partly lies with the funders because they're the people with the money, and if they're going to have things like mandates and things, I think once they get to mandating things like Plan S and things, I think they have a bigger role to play in educating people about, just publishing in general. I think, like I said, at a local level, for me as an academic, I think I need to be talking to the PhD students and master students I'm working with about this. I think most of the responsibility lies with us and our institutions, and then the funders. I kind of made this comment earlier on. I think the library staff have a huge role to play in this because they can see it all right in front of them, and they get the snarky emails from an academic who can't get access to a paper. And I've made this point to a couple of people I work with in the library. I'm like, just let's imagine an example where we just pull the plug on subscriptions from Imperial College, and I can't remember how many millions we pay a year in subscriptions. Just pull the plug. So when an academic goes in to download a paper, they can't get it. You will have a queue a mile long of people waiting to be educated about publishing outside your door within about a day, right? That's how you would educate people. I had a slide in here which I took out, which was actually a very big stick and a tiny carrot, right? And I removed it. But I think like the big stick are things like that. It's where you literally drag somebody by the hair to the problem so they can see it, warts and all, and go, look, you've ignored it for 20, 30, 40 years in your career. This is what's been going on. We have no more money, or the funders won't allow you to do that. And then suddenly people will engage. They don't need to be on Twitter to do that. As soon as you get the website doesn't appear, the PDF doesn't appear, then suddenly you've educated yourself that there's something's happened. So I'm really keen on us taking responsibility for that. I think you, the publishers, you've got... I can't see why you should have to do that, really.
It's just an addition on that last point where I think talking about the carrot side of things, that I think there are things that we can do. Because there's a difference between saying that the journal impact factor, let's take that as an example, doesn't work very well, but it's not our responsibility to force people to use something else. Okay. But at the same time, we can work on putting alternatives out there, because as publishers, we're the ones with the data. So I think that's where the bit that would be really interesting is to talk about, and it's on that question of what can we do, is what would work to help academics judge quality, because you mentioned it several times. It is obviously incredibly important to academics to be able to judge quality. And we probably have to acknowledge that an academic's gut feeling of where the best papers are is also not always without flaw. It can be judged, it can be biased by institution, by people, by gender, by who knows what. And so how can we get better at the data-driven approach to that?
Yeah.
So where you're commenting on Frontier's metrics and you're saying, well, they don't really work, to know why they don't work, what's the issue, what can we do better, that would be constructive.
I do like the idea of having, I think Stephen Curry always refers to it as a basket of metrics, so now you go to a web page, instead of just GIF, you see like all these other numbers and nobody knows really, even I don't, what some of the other numbers mean or how they're even calculated. But I think so let's go, just staying with journal impact factors, you were at the Altmetrics meeting where Nature sort of had that slide up and they had a questionnaire to academics and they said, do you know what the impact factor is? And I think 95% of academics said yes. And then the next question was, do you think impact factors tell you anything about the quality, I think it was, of the paper? And I think it was like 60-something%. And the follow-up question, which should have been, but they never asked, is, do you know how the impact factor is calculated? So that's more the issue, is like, you can just give people numbers all day, but if they don't care to actually think a wee bit about where it comes from. So yes, I think there should be more numbers in a way. Should there be more numbers? I don't know, it goes back to gut feeling, like, can I contract out, can I read a paper and decide whether it's good or not, or do I need that impact factor to tell me whether it's good or not? I fundamentally don't believe I need the impact factor to tell me if it's good or not, because I've read, because I'm old, I've read a lot and I've written a lot, and I know that my best paper's in this one with an impact factor of 1.5, and then this really quite lightweight one's in one with 5. But maybe that's something that comes with experience, and as an early career researcher, it's harder. You probably want something more rigid to hold on to, and that could be a metric of some sort. But I would like to think of publishers and societies, maybe that would be an interesting thing, having workshops around metrics specifically aimed at early career researchers, maybe on campuses or something like that would be very cool. Yeah.
Chris, thanks very much indeed. That's an excellent first session, and the conference is now officially off and running.